We're here at Arizona State University. I'm talking with Jim Gee today about games, learning, and assessment. Thanks for being with us today.
It's great to be here.
Let's start off with what do you think assessment is? How would you define assessment?
So assessment is a judgment about what progress you're making. And in fact, if you think about it, assessment is kind of indigenous to life, just to lead a life. You do stuff in the world and you have a goal. But in order to accomplish that goal, after you've done something, you've got to appreciate what happens in a certain way. You've got to say, what happened when I did that, is it working towards the goal or not? Was the result good or not? Do I like it? Do I appreciate it? That's an assessment. The world's assessing you, and you pay close attention to that. Then you change your action if you think the result was not good, and you keep doing that till you accomplish your goal or you change your goal. So assessment is part of core action for human beings. And when we talk about formative assessment or evaluative assessment, what you're really talking about is both of them are ways to resource the learner. Formative assessment is assessment that is coming right back to the learner, like this appreciative function, saying, am I making progress? Is this working? And evaluative assessment, if it's ethical, is telling some other stakeholder, teacher or principal or parent, how can I resource this learner? Is this trajectory working or not? So that's what assessment is to me. Too often we define assessment in purely psychometric terms, and we miss the fact that it's a natural part of learning if you view learning as progress through time.
What do you think the state of assessment is right now, and
well, I think that for me the state of assessment is when you look at formalized assessments like tests, or the ways we carry out assessments in school, they're done because they're effective, right? They're efficient. If you think about it, in a time where we could not really collect copious information about you and we could not watch your development over long periods of time, doing some sort of assessment that was standardizable and then comparable to a bunch of people and efficient is probably, it's an industrial system and it worked. But today, we can collect copious information through all sorts of digital ways of getting information, but also all sorts of ways of collecting it through activity. So that means to me that we are almost morally bound to assess you in a different way. We're morally bound to assess you on multiple variables, not one. We're morally bound to show you, when we assess those multiple variables, what it means and what you could do about it, rather than give you untransparent information, right, that just sorts you. I mean, an A or a C or an 88 doesn't mean anything because it's not actionable. We also are morally obligated when we can collect lots of information, not only on you, but all sorts of other people who've done the same thing as you. We become morally bound to assess growth, development, trajectories towards progress. Furthermore, in some cases, when we're interacting with digital media or we're interacting in systems, that sort of information and how it is then mined and given back to you for this growth-based assessment on multiple variables can be done intricately to the learning system, right? We can get, if you think in a good game, it's very hard to distinguish learning and assessment, right? Because essentially the game is always assessing you and then telling you that didn't work. Here's some information to make it better. So learning and assessment are tightly married. And to the extent that games like Halo or Civilization or others give you assessment, it's often multiple variables. And it can often be done by comparing you to thousands or millions of other players.
Can you give an example of where you think this is being used effectively now?
Well, it's been used effectively for some years in video games. So if you look at a place like real-time strategy games like Rise of Nations, after you finish this is part of the fun of the games, after you finish each play session, which you might be playing against 3, 4, 5 other people, you'll get 20, 25 different graphs, the graph on different variables, how each of these players did across time, who was ahead here, who was on 30 variables, right? And what do you use those for? I mean, they truly are an assessment. They're not an A, B, C, D. They're 24 graphs that show you across time when you were winning and when you were losing across multiple variables. So this is assessment that is not just formative in that it's helping me, but it's also forcing me to theorize the game, right? Which is a very deep form of learning. Now, if we can do that in a video game, we can do that in schools. And there's been a lot of work on data mining, taking the exhaust off of digital systems. Where we have been weaker is how do we collect copious information when the person's not just doing a click stream, right? How do we begin to collect information across time in systems of collaborative learning and stuff? And then not only that, share that information across institutions. Be a wonderful thing to know, here's what Johnny and Janie did in school, here's what they did at the library, here's what they did in the community center, the after-school program, and have the adults on the same page.
So what do you think the barriers are? Is it just economic to being able to do things like that?
I think the barriers in our society, first of all, these are rarely now technological barriers, although we should be more creative in how we collect information across the world. I mean, if we can collect a bunch of information of how fitness people do stuff, we can collect a lot of information, part of it through this gamification stuff if it's done right. The barriers in society are will. When you have technologies or new systems, then you have to have the willpower to use them. And for people who can buy them, for the wealthy who can buy them because they see it's going to advantage their kid, it's going to make their kid a deeper learner or get them into Princeton, then there's no barrier. But the barrier comes when the society says, when does something like this become an equity goal? Right? When is this the sort of thing that everybody ought to get? And we used to, in my youth, which was long ago, college was free. I went to University of California completely free because people thought, look, there are some things that must be free in society. And we don't have that anymore. We don't have the will to say some things cannot be on the market because they're too important to the society as a whole.
What role do you think that games can play in creating assessments that are more fair, more reliable, more useful?
Well, the games are a form of technology that are almost natural for assessment. We hope assessments will primarily be based on problem solving, right? Right now we tend to assess people on factual knowledge, but we know that teaching just for factual knowledge, while it can get some retention of those facts, that retention doesn't last long. But when you teach for problem solving, you have to use the facts as tools to solve the problems. You have to say, oh, I got to get this down because I really care whether this problem gets solved. And then you get not only fact retention, but the problem solving ability. If you say, okay, I want problem solving, then games are just problem spaces. I mean, if you think about it, what a game is that it's a very good game mechanic that is made to be married to a certain class of problem solving. It constantly makes it a way that motivates you, guides you, manages your attention, at the same time keeps you highly motivated and entertained, so you're doing a lot of practice. So as problem spaces, the more you look at assessment in terms of a game, the more you really get rid of the distinction between learning and assessment. You begin to say, look, the assessments are like tests. Standardized tests are really quite disparate from learning because that's the best we could do. But the better we get at creating learning and the better we get at creating assessment, they collapse into each other. When you defeat, in Dark Souls boss, you have passed the test, right? But you come into that boss having had copious information about your skill level because of what you've done to get in there. And that's the way I think if we're assessing algebra or physics or civics or anything else, we would want to do it. And and again, since the game is being played over time, it's inherently developmental. Since it can be played socially, it's inherently collaborative. It can be collaborative. And it's modifiable, it's customizable. So the game becomes almost the perfect metaphor for how we should design learning, teaching, assessment systems. Not just with games. So we can use games to do it. But I would say, look, what I've just said about games, like DragonBox, you don't have to do with a game, but you have to do it. You have to be doing problem solving over time that is well designed, well mentored, the kid's attentional economy is well directed, copious information, possible collaboration. and this, you can create systems in different ways. This is the thing I think that many people have missed about my work in games. I have never advocated we should just use games for learning. I advocate we should create learning systems and use every tool at our disposal for what it's best for. But that we have a lot to learn about the core principles of learning and teaching from games because they do it so well.